Hello, my dear friend. Today, I'm sharing a story that reflects the delicate threads of love, trust, and resilience, weaving through a relationship that's tested by shadows of the past. This story isn't just about a husband and wife, it's about self-worth, understanding, and the quiet strength that we find within when everything around us seems uncertain. In the beginning, there was a picture-perfect relationship. Julia and David were a couple others often admired. Their marriage was one built on friendship, laughter, and mutual respect. They had a warm home filled with light-hearted conversations, late-night chats, and shared dreams. Julia, in her heart, believed David to be her soulmate, the one person who would stand by her through thick and thin. But one day, something shifted. David, without much fanfare, mentioned reconnecting with an old friend, someone from his past named Claire. Claire had been a significant part of his life long before Julia, and her reappearance stirred memories and feelings in him that he couldn't quite name. For Julia, however, that name was more than just a reminder. It felt like an intruder creeping into the sanctuary of their marriage. At first, Julia brushed it off as a casual, harmless connection. After all, she reasoned, everyone has a past. Yet, with every passing mention of Claire, Julia felt an unease growing within her, a gnawing insecurity that was foreign and unwelcome. It wasn't jealousy, at least not the kind she'd ever felt before. It was more a sense of dread, a quiet fear that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't enough. She tried to mask it, holding back questions and choosing her words carefully. But inside, she was battling her own insecurities. Her mind would wander to thoughts like, what if he finds in her something he no longer sees in me? She felt ashamed of these thoughts, but they were there, persistent and haunting. Julia would catch herself staring in the mirror, examining every line, every flaw, wondering if those were the things David now saw, things that pushed him away. The reality was, David was oblivious to Julia's internal struggle. He didn't notice her restless nights or the way her laughter had grown a little quieter. For him, Claire's presence was like a casual friendship, a nostalgic trip into a part of his life that was long gone. He was blind to the shadows it cast over Julia's heart. One evening, after a particularly silent dinner, Julia couldn't hold back any longer. "David," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, "do you ever think about what we mean to each other? About us?" Her words felt like fragile, raw confessions, stripped of all pretense. David, startled, looked at her with confusion. "What's wrong, Julia?" he asked, genuinely concerned but utterly unaware of the storm brewing within her. Julia hesitated, struggling to find the words that could express the mess of emotions she felt. Do you think Claire's presence has changed anything? I mean, between us?" She couldn't meet his gaze, fearing what she might see. David's reaction was a mixture of surprise and a hint of irritation. "Claire? She's just an old friend. Julia, you're overthinking this," he replied, brushing off her concerns in a way that only deepened the ache within her. She realized that he didn't see it, didn't understand how his rekindled friendship with Claire was unraveling the quiet confidence she'd built over years. This was the beginning of Julia's journey, not just in her marriage, but with herself. She knew she had to confront the deep-seated insecurities and fears that were rooted in her own self-worth. It wasn't Claire, and it wasn't David. It was a part of Julia that needed to believe in her own value, independent of anyone else's validation. Days turned into weeks, and Julia found herself on a path of self-discovery. She began to reflect on the woman she had become over the years, on the dreams she had set aside, and on the parts of herself that had dimmed in the comfort of marriage. She realized that her insecurities were not about Claire, but about her own struggle to feel worthy and fulfilled. Julia started spending more time on the things she loved, rediscovering her passions and nurturing friendships she had let fade. She joined a local art class, something she had always wanted to do but had put off for years. She found a sense of joy and purpose that was entirely hers, untouched by her marriage or her insecurities. Her journey wasn't easy. There were days when the fears crept back, when she'd question herself, question David, and wonder if her marriage was slowly slipping away. But with each small step she took toward reclaiming her own happiness, she felt a strength within herself that she hadn't known before. One evening, as she sat across from David, she realized that she no longer felt threatened by Claire's shadow. Her love for David was still there, but it was no longer tethered to fear. Julia had discovered a love and respect for herself that was independent of anything or anyone else. And in that moment, David noticed something different in Julia: a quiet confidence, a renewed sense of self. For the first time, he realized that he had taken her presence for granted, not out of neglect, but out of a belief that she would always be there, unwavering and secure. "Julia," he said softly, reaching across the table, "I see you. I see you in a way I haven't for a long time, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not recognizing the strength and beauty within you." Julia looked at him, and with a gentle smile she replied, "Thank you, David. But I found that strength within myself. This is me, standing in my own light." 1. In the days that followed their heartfelt conversation, Julia felt a quiet peace settle over her. It wasn't that everything was perfect or that she no longer had doubts, but for the first time in a long while, she felt secure in her own skin. Her journey of rediscovery had shown her that she was more than just David's wife. She was Julia, a woman with her own dreams, strengths, and desires. David, too, found himself reflecting deeply on their marriage. He had assumed that their bond was unshakable, that Julia's presence was something he could rely on without question. But watching her blossom, seeing her confidence grow and her laughter become more genuine, he realized just how much he had overlooked. It wasn't that he had stopped loving her. Rather, he had taken her for granted in a way he never intended. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, David broke the comfortable silence between them. "Julia," he began, his voice sincere, "I want you to know that I see you differently now. I see the strength you found, and it's humbling. It's making me look at myself, too." Julia paused, surprised by his vulnerability. She looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with curiosity. "What do you mean, David?" He sighed, searching for the right words. "I think I've been so focused on the idea of our marriage being solid that I forgot to make it feel alive. I see how you've been growing, doing things you love, finding joy outside of just us. And it's made me realize that I've been a little lost myself." Julia felt a swell of empathy. She reached for his hand, feeling the familiar warmth and weight of his touch, yet sensing something new, a tenderness and honesty they hadn't shared in a long time. "You know," she said gently, "we both got comfortable in our roles. I think somewhere along the way we stopped asking ourselves who we wanted to become. I wanted so much to be your perfect wife that I forgot to be my own person. But I'm glad we're seeing it now." Her words struck a chord in David. For years, he'd poured himself into his work, into providing stability, thinking that was enough. But watching Julia's journey of self-discovery had awoken a longing within him. He, too, wanted to reconnect with parts of himself that had been left behind. Maybe, he ventured, we could start finding ourselves together. Not just as husband and wife, but as two people growing side by side. A quiet excitement took root between them. It wasn't about fixing their marriage, rather, it was about reimagining it. They both understood that love wasn't just about commitment, it was about nurturing each other's individuality, allowing space for growth and coming together with renewed appreciation. Over the next few months, they set out on a shared journey of exploration. They began by embracing small changes, setting aside time for activities they each enjoyed, like Julia's painting and David's rediscovery of his love for music. On weekends, they'd sometimes join each other, with Julia sketching while David strummed his old guitar, both finding peace in each other's company. But the most transformative part of their journey was the honest conversations they shared, free of judgment or expectation. They opened up about their fears, their dreams, and even the disappointments they'd never spoken about. For the first time in years, Julia felt she was seeing David not just as her husband, but as a man with his own insecurities and desires. One day, as they strolled through a nearby park, David turned to Julia, a newfound vulnerability in his eyes. "I used to think that marriage was about putting each other first, about giving everything for the other person. But now, I think it's more than that. It's about helping each other become whole." Julia nodded, understanding him in a way she hadn't before. Exactly. It's about supporting each other's journeys, not just as a couple, but as individuals. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. It was a promise, unspoken yet deeply felt. A commitment not just to their marriage, but to each other's growth. Their life together didn't suddenly become flawless. They still had misunderstandings, moments of frustration, and occasional doubts. But what had changed was the foundation of their relationship. It was no longer built on a dependency or fear of losing each other. It was based on mutual respect, trust, and the assurance that they each had the freedom to be themselves. As the years passed, Julia and David's relationship evolved in ways they hadn't anticipated. They discovered that the truest love wasn't found in never facing challenges, but in facing them together, with open hearts and unwavering support. Julia's fear of losing David to a shadow of the past faded, replaced by a deep-seated confidence that their connection was built on something real, something unbreakable. In the quiet moments they shared, Julia would sometimes reflect on the journey they had taken. She realized that the insecurities that once haunted her had become a source of strength, guiding her towards self-acceptance and resilience. She no longer lived in the shadow of another woman, or anyone else. She had reclaimed her own light, and in doing so, had strengthened the love she shared with David. 1. As time went on, Julia and David's renewed connection continued to flourish, bringing a fresh intimacy and closeness that was both familiar and new. Their small acts of independence and self-growth created a balance where they felt both free and united. Yet, as their marriage entered this new chapter, life had more lessons in store. One crisp autumn afternoon, Julia found herself reflecting on the concept of forgiveness, both toward others and herself. She was alone at a cafe, sipping her tea, when an unexpected thought came to her. Claire. While she had moved beyond the insecurities that had once plagued her, Julia realized that she still carried a small shadow of resentment. Claire's brief reappearance in David's life had been the spark for her own growth, yet Julia had never fully processed her feelings about it. Instead of pushing it aside, Julia chose to confront it. She thought about reaching out to Claire, not as an old rival, but as someone who had unwittingly influenced her path to self-discovery. With a deep breath, she opened her phone and found Claire's number, still saved from when they had met briefly at a gathering years ago. To Julia's surprise, Claire answered warmly. After some tentative small talk, Julia found the courage to speak openly. "Claire, this might sound strange, but I wanted to thank you," Julia began, her voice steady. "When you reconnected with David, it forced me to face a lot of things within myself. It wasn't easy, but I came out stronger." Claire listened quietly before responding, a touch of emotion in her voice. "Julia, I didn't know that my presence caused you pain. I never intended to stir anything up between you and David. He spoke so highly of you. I could tell how much he loves you." Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her. She realized that this conversation wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about closure, about acknowledging the past without letting it define her future. They spoke a little longer, sharing stories about their lives and laughing over small memories. By the end of the call, Julia felt a strange yet liberating sense of kinship with Claire, a woman she had once considered her adversary, but now saw as just another person on her journey. After the call, Julia felt as though a weight had lifted. There was no longer any lingering shadow of the past. It was gone, replaced by a quiet peace and a newfound appreciation for the path she had taken. When she returned home that evening, she shared the conversation with David. He listened intently, admiration clear in his eyes. "You're incredible, Julia," he said softly, pulling her close. "I don't think I've ever met anyone as brave as you. Not only did you work through this for yourself, but you also reached out to her. That takes real strength." Julia smiled, feeling his warmth and support radiate through her. "I realized that I didn't want to carry any unresolved feelings. Not for her, not for anyone. I wanted to be free." Their embrace lingered, a quiet affirmation of everything they had rebuilt together. David had seen Julia's transformation, and in watching her grow, he had changed too. He no longer saw love as something fixed or unchanging. He understood now that love was alive, evolving, and, like Julia, he was willing to nurture it. From that day forward, they found that their marriage had a newfound resilience. They became each other's champions, each other's confidants, no longer afraid to confront the difficult emotions that sometimes surfaced. The trust between them was unshakable because they had seen each other at their most vulnerable, and they had chosen to grow together. Years passed, and their lives continued to evolve in ways they hadn't anticipated. They faced new challenges, from career shifts to family responsibilities, but they handled each one with the quiet strength they had found within themselves. Their relationship had become a partnership, not just in name but in spirit, a shared journey where they supported each other's growth, dreams, and happiness. In their later years, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Julia turned to David with a contented smile. "You know," she said softly, "if I could go back in time, I wouldn't change a thing. Everything, the doubts, the fears, even Claire's return, taught me who I am. And it brought us here. David squeezed her hand, his gaze filled with deep affection. You're right. I wouldn't change anything either. I love you for who you are, Julia. The strong, resilient, incredible woman you've always been. 1. As the years rolled on, Julia and David found that their marriage had matured into something even richer. They had entered a new phase of life, one where their children were grown, and retirement was on the horizon. Their days were filled with quiet routines and cherished moments, a rhythm they had grown to love. Yet the challenges they faced continued to evolve, and each one brought new lessons about love, resilience, and the beauty of their life together. One spring morning, David suggested they take a trip, just the two of them. He wanted to visit a small, serene town on the coast, a place where they could relax and reminisce, far from the bustle of daily life. Julia agreed, her heart warm with anticipation. She loved the idea of spending uninterrupted time with David, as they had done in the early days of their marriage. When they arrived in the coastal town, it was as though time slowed down. The quiet charm of the place, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and the simple pleasure of being together brought a kind of peace they hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, as they strolled along the beach hand in hand, David turned to Julia, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about all we've been through?" he asked softly. "Sometimes it feels like we've lived so many different lives together." Julia smiled, the memories flooding back. "Yes, I do. I think about the times we struggled, the times we laughed, and even those moments when I wasn't sure we'd make it. But through it all, we found each other over and over again." David stopped walking and looked out over the ocean, the twilight casting a gentle glow around them. "There were times I thought I understood love completely. But then you taught me that love is something we keep learning. It's not a finish line, it's a journey." Julia felt a lump rise in her throat. She knew he was right. Their love had taken many forms over the years. Newlywed love, love as young parents, love through challenges, love in rediscovery. And now, here they were, experiencing a love that felt like home, something both steady and profound. In the quiet of the evening, they shared stories from their past, laughing about old memories, sharing thoughts they had kept to themselves, and even revealing dreams they still held for the future. It was a conversation without barriers, one that felt like a renewal of the vows they had made so many years ago. As they returned to their cottage that night, Julia felt a deep sense of gratitude. She realized that the insecurities she once felt were now like distant echoes. There was no doubt, no fear, only the quiet certainty that she and David had built something beautiful, something enduring. In the shadow that had once loomed over her, she had found her own light, and it had transformed their love. Over the following days, they continued to explore the town, each day bringing a simple joy. Quiet breakfasts on the patio, walks through the local market, and hours spent side by side, reading or simply enjoying each other's presence. In these unremarkable moments, Julia found a profound sense of fulfillment, a peace she had once thought was impossible. One morning, David surprised her with a small notebook, its cover worn and slightly faded. As she opened it, she saw that he had filled it with letters to her, written over the years. Some were penned during their happiest times, others during moments of doubt and difficulty. Each letter was a snapshot of his heart, a testament to the love he had for her. With tears in her eyes, Julia read one letter that had been written shortly after their first child was born. Julia, I never thought I could love anyone more than I loved you. But seeing you with our child has shown me a love I never imagined. You are everything to me, my partner, my friend, the mother of my child. I want to spend my life making you as happy as you make me. Another letter, written years later, reflected his feelings after they had reconciled from a rough patch. I'm sorry for the times I took you for granted, for the days I let my pride or my own struggles cloud my love for you. Being with you is the greatest gift of my life, and I will never stop trying to be the husband you deserve. Thank you for forgiving me, for choosing to stay, for believing in us. Julia held the notebook to her chest, her heart filled with an overwhelming love for the man who had been by her side through every chapter of their lives. David, she whispered, you've given me so much. I could never have asked for a more beautiful life. He smiled, taking her hand in his. You've given me strength, joy, and love in ways I never knew possible. If I've done anything right in this life, it's choosing you. In that moment, they both knew that their journey together was something rare, something precious. They had built a love that was unbreakable, not because it had never faced hardship, but because it had endured and evolved. Their love was rooted in trust, resilience, and the understanding that they were two souls who had chosen to walk this path together in all its twists and turns. As they watched the sun rise over the ocean that morning, Julia realized that this was the life she had always wanted. Not a perfect life, but a real one. A life where they had grown together, where they had lifted each other up, where they had found peace in each other's presence. In the shadow of doubt, she had found her own strength, and in doing so, she had found the truest, deepest love with David. As they sat there, hand in hand, they knew that their story would continue, one beautiful day at a time. And in the quiet moments, they would always remember the journey that had brought them here, a journey of love, growth, and unwavering commitment to each other. Julia and David's final days in the coastal town were filled with tranquility, a quiet contentment that settled into their hearts. They knew that the time they had shared there, revisiting memories and rekindling their bond, had solidified something between them that would last forever. Back at home, their lives resumed with the same rhythm, but now with a fresh awareness of all they had built together. They cherished the simple routines, mornings spent reading together on the porch, evenings cooking side by side in the kitchen, and the laughter that filled their home whenever family or friends visited. Their love had softened, like a well-worn path that had become a familiar, comforting part of their lives. As the years passed, they found themselves surrounded by the love of their children and grandchildren, who brought them endless joy and energy. Julia often marveled at how much her family had grown, how her love for David had woven itself into a larger tapestry of lives and memories. She was proud of the home they had created, a place of warmth, laughter, and belonging. One day, while sitting in the garden they had tended to for decades, David turned to her, his face weathered yet filled with that same warmth she had always known. I wouldn't change a thing, Julia, he said, reaching for her hand. Every step we took brought us here. Julia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Neither would I, David. You're my home, and every moment has been worth it. As they sat together, hand in hand, watching the late afternoon sun dip below the horizon, They knew that theirs had been a life well lived. They had weathered storms and celebrated joys, and through it all, they had chosen each other, time and again. In the quiet, Julia leaned her head on David's shoulder, feeling a deep, abiding peace. Their journey was one of love, of resilience, and of finding themselves in each other. As the years continued to pass, they found joy in each day, content in the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and shared a bond that time itself could never diminish.